Hello everyone, this is Rick, and welcome to Astral Club. This is Questions and Answers number 18. It's been a couple months since we've done this, and as an Astral Club, I feel it's necessary to share this particular site with as many of our fellow members as I can. Because after all, we are a group who supports one another. So I like doing these at least every couple of months. Once again, a lot of good stuff, a lot of good comments, a lot of good questions. I can only pick a certain amount, and that's what I did. So before I get started, I'll just mention Patreon. If you'd like, you could become a patron of Astral Club, and you can get early videos on Monday rather than wait till Saturday. There's no commercials. There's a Patreon email for patrons where we can talk back and forth and answer questions. And overall, it's a pretty cool way to support Astral Club if you can. But you can also support us with your energy, your prayers. Energy sent Astral Club way, my way, is very much appreciated, and I can feel it at times. And it's been noted recently by my angel guide of the energy that has been flowing towards not only Astral Club, myself, but also our movement from Earth, and a lot of it I think is coming from Astral Club members. So, if you can do that, that's great. You got a little bit of extra energy to spare. We can definitely use it. There's a lot going on right now, and I can't share that right now. So this is a perfect time to get into some comments and questions that I think you'll be interested in discussing. First one up comes from the most recent video, which was Rise of the Resistance. Of course, I talked about how I would manage to get out of my body because there was the shell that was containing me, probably because I talked about the council. And then I went to the moon. We met some of my exiled Astral Guide School class members. They were sent on their missions, and I was sent on mine to rescue the lead counselor. And I was lucky enough to be able to rescue him, and because he was very necessary for us to really begin the resistance to this illegal and immoral council that is currently in power. Soul Dust Sword, Fajar Siswandaru, and Gear Dead, among others, commented that they thought the altering slightly my vibrational signature to escape that shell that was placed around me to suppress my astral projections. They thought that was very innovative, and they mentioned possibly it could be used in other ways, maybe to break into the Akashic Records, for instance. I don't know at this stage. I mean, this is the first time that I've used it, and it took a lot of energy. It wasn't easy, and when I returned to my physical body, it felt like I had a medium hangover, a headache, throbbing, the dry mouth. So there were some definite physical side effects. So it's not the kind of thing that I'm going to do a lot if I can avoid it. But it's something that I'm going to do experiment with going forward in the future. I really don't drink, so it's been a while since I've experienced a hangover. And turns out they're no more fun than they used to be. Next question was from Leo Franz. And this one I really want to get into. Now, Leo, who I'm sure is very intelligent, because after all, he's an Astral Club member. And as far as I'm concerned, that's the best intelligence test you can ever take. But he had a hard time believing that the lead counselor just didn't understand the concept of betrayal. And I don't think he's alone. I gave him an answer, but it just didn't convince him. And I thought I would devote more time to it. It's very easy for us to be provincial. To be provincial within our own countries, and to be provincial within our own planet versus other civilizations. I think it's very hard to imagine that there's others out there who think very differently from you. Let's look at some examples. Now, humans, as they currently exist on this planet, we are all identical from a genetic standpoint. We all evolved in similar situations. Yes, we split off, went to different areas of the planet, and over some few thousands of years, our cultures diverged to some extent. So really, there are differences now, but they're very surface differences. Every bit as surface as the amount of melanin that we have in our skin. But problems happen all the time. For instance, during the invasion of Iraq, I think the president, George W. Bush, didn't really understand the Arabic and the Iraqi culture. I believe that he thought that if he could just remove Saddam Hussein, before you knew it, there'd be the equivalent of Democrats and Republicans running Iraq, and they'd all be attending church instead of their mosques, and the women would be in bikinis and eating apple pie. And I generally think he was surprised when Saddam Hussein was removed and all of that didn't happen because he just didn't understand this different culture because it was so different from his and he had such limited experience in other cultures. He just didn't get it. Let's look at examples in science fiction. Star Trek. The typical Star Trek episodes, especially in the earlier versions of Star Trek, generally they had the alien of the week. The alien was, well, pretty much humanoid for budget reasons, but also the writers, they didn't lack imagination, but Roddenberry wanted to deal with real Earth social problems. But he wanted the aliens to have the problems. That way, it wouldn't bother people so much back home because it's the aliens that have these problems that we're going through now. But these aliens had the same kind of problems, and they thought, at a very large extent, very much like we did. But is that really the way it's going to work? Let's take a look at my favorite example. 2 to 3 million years ago, there were chimps that existed on the north side of the Congo River. We're not exactly sure when, but at some point the Congo River was narrow and it was shallow enough that some portion of those chimps were able to get across to the other side. But then the river, not that long after, became much, much broader, much deeper, and filled with floating monsters called crocodiles. So these two populations, the chimps on the north side and this other population, were divided for several millions of years. On the north side, along with those chimps, there was gorillas, and there was our proto-ancestors. On the north side, food was relatively scarce. Competition was fierce. There were predators all over the place, constantly, doing what they do best, predating on us and the other species. So, in order to survive, these hominids developed violent tendencies. Along with cooperation, they learned to steal, to betray, to have a wide variety of ways in which they could seize food for themselves and their tribe at the expense of others. And those behaviors helped the chimps and our ancient proto-ancestors to survive. So these behaviors are essentially the ones that we have today. But what happened to that other isolated band that was on the south side of the Congo River? They had it much different. The food was much more plentiful. There was virtually no competition for that food, and the predation was much less. Any of that population that started showing antisocial, violent, or other negative behaviors would be shunned, kicked out of the tribe. So those behaviors were suppressed. Today, we call those creatures bonobos. When bonobos have some tension or stress between one another, they solve it by having sex. Chimps, on the other hand, we know war against other tribes and exhibit violence and steal from their other fellow chimps. We, unfortunately, developed very similar tendencies and evolved in that very same atmosphere. So we have very similar tendencies. We war as well. Now, how great would it have been if our pro-ancestors had been on the south side and perhaps had grown up in an environment where there wasn't that type of competition, where you didn't need to exhibit those negative behaviors in order to survive. I'll bet you conflicts amongst humans, had we grown up on that side, would be much more pleasurably resolved than they are today. So here you have an example on our own planet of a species which over a few million years, growing up in evolving in different environments, developed very different survival traits. The lead counselor came from what we might term as a super Earth. There was plenty of fair weather and food. There was no starvation. There was no reason for warring because resources were plentiful and their population for the size of their planet was relatively few. So there was no need to develop the violent antisocial tendencies to survive that we had to develop. So why is it so hard for us to posit that perhaps an alien species evolved in a very different way than we did, and so that they wouldn't necessarily understand this universal human concept of betrayal? Because they didn't need to have that behavior to survive, whereas we and our ancestors did. And unfortunately, we're still stuck with it. So we need, I think, to really keep this type of idea in mind and try to understand that not only do fellow humans who are exactly alike as far as we are genetically, have different customs and look at the world slightly differently, but alien species can look at the world dramatically differently than we do. So let's not make the mistake that, well, of course, everyone must understand this because we do. I think that's a big mistake. So that's my reply. Photios agreed with me on that one, and he figured they probably picked the most trustworthy and virtuous people to represent their planets anyway. So these wouldn't be people who would be most likely to have those negative traits anyway, especially amongst the society that never developed them in the first place. Leon Latin indicated he was afraid that I might be giving away valuable intelligence through these videos. Believe me, I am very aware now, based on the current situation, that what I say might cause a problem for the resistance. And I'm not going to give away any strategic information. That meeting I talked about during the rise of the resistance, That was a week out of date. It was essentially the same thing as a newspaper printing a week after D-Day that, oh, by the way, the Allies invaded the beaches of Normandy a week ago. The Germans would have been, yeah, we kind of noticed that. That's not really telling us anything we don't already know. And as a matter of fact, one of the reasons it's a good idea to have a Q&A right now is there's some things that I don't want to talk about right now. So yes, I am very much keeping in mind what I'm assuming that everybody is listening to this, not just Astral Club members. In the video, which was the origin of the council and the wars of the gods, Lightning Round, Signum Eternus, and Dan Palladino, as well as the Keeper of the Shade, all were very interested in hearing how the Earth fit into these wars of the gods and how we were just a small part of this greater war. And I think a lot of folks were very interested in that whole subject. Next up is Neuroticus. Did these gods that warred have physical bodies that could war? Yes, they did. There are very many aliens that have visited Earth. Some are third dimensional, some are fourth dimensional and higher. The third dimensional ones have physical bodies. They could die. However, I don't think they did that very often because from the legends, it seems like most of the folks who did the dying during the wars were Earth people. We were the pawns that were being used in this particular chess game. We were the ones who did the dying. However, there was also various legends from the Egyptians, the Babylonians, and the Sumerians that mention these godlike kings who ruled for thousands of years. Now, our archaeologists dismiss this once again as our ancestors just being very creative. But these legends mentioned that it was possible for these gods to somehow transfer their soul, their life force, whatever, into another physical third dimensional body. So the body was different, but it was the same individual. This obviously is a technology that we don't currently have, but I've read articles in the past where people are kicking around all kinds of ideas that might one day lead to something like this. So, yeah, these gods did have third dimensional bodies, but they didn't do a lot of the dying. We pretty much volunteered for that particular thankless task. Next up, and I'm not going to try to pronounce the last name because I'll bet you I'd mess it up. Anyway, his name is Alexander, and then it's Pajic, and I'll bet you it's probably pronounced differently than I think it is. I'd rather just say that. He wanted to know, how do I integrate all these experiences so fast? I think it takes me time too, especially if they're very intense. But I've been doing this now for the last, 5 decades or so. So you get used to these things after a while. It's just part of my life, something I've had to deal with ever since I was a kid. So it becomes much more natural to me. And I guess it was gradual too, because as a child, I didn't have all these intense experiences. Most of my experiences, as I've indicated in the past, were, astral light, flying around, maybe meeting a couple of folks, talking to a few spirits, but nothing as intense as what I have now. I think one of the most intense experiences I had is when I was a kid. I said, hey, I want to go to the moon. And then all of a sudden I started hurtling at the moon. And it took me about 10 different projections to eventually suppress my fear so that I could do that. So I had a lot of time to get used to all of this type of experience. And I would suggest any new projector also proceed along a gradual course. If you learn how to do some sort of physical sport, if you just learn how to play football, if you just learn how to play baseball, you don't want to try to become a National Football League hero the next week. You don't want to try to join a Major League American baseball team the next week either. You want to take things slowly, gradually, so that you can get used to the effect of this whole learning process. I had an interesting question from Chara Labakis. He would like to know if he could live on other planets rather than just Earth, if it's necessary to indeed reincarnate. I replied like this. If you want to know, first of all, the answer is yes. But if you want to know the percentage of human spirits that typically decide after coming here to Earth to jump onto an alien planet's evolutionary cycle, ask your family, ask your friends that if they have to reincarnate, would they rather reincarnate in their present country, or would they rather reincarnate in Papua New Guinea, a completely alien culture to their current experience? The percent that says, yes, I would rather my next reincarnation be in Papua New Guinea in the middle of some forest tribe somewhere rather than where I am right now, that's the percent that actually chooses, and qualifies for that matter, to actually reincarnate in an alien planet's evolution once they get started here. In the video Expelled from Astral Guide School, Chelsea Labrucheri and Alexei Konovalek ask, was there anything preventing me from acting as a guide without the school? No. I think I've shared experiences before I joined Astral Guide School where I did what little I could for certain lost spirits to help them move on from whatever current hellish experience they were experiencing, whether they were lost in the lower astral or stuck in the sub-astral. I think Astral Guide School really just is kind of like a grad school. It helps you to increase your skills, to make you better at doing what you're interested in doing, if that's being a guide. So no, it doesn't prevent me from helping, but I think it was a valuable resource to help me expand my abilities and my talents in that particular area. Alex asked, what did you mean by saying beings can be powerful whether they're able to astral project or not? Well, I meant that quite literally, and I include Astral Club members in this. Every physical human has a certain amount of life force energy that sustains them while they live. Now, that life force energy can ebb and flow. If that power is directed through a fixed will, it can influence events to some extent in the physical, and most particularly on the astral planes. That's precisely what I meant. You don't need to astral project to be able to direct that life force energy in a direction that you believe is necessary or will be of benefit to yourself or others. It certainly helps, because when you can astral project, you can much more easily absorb additional life force energies. Whenever I had problems sleeping, and I shared this in the past, I'd be at a low ebb energy-wise, because I would be suffering from this insomnia. I would fly over a crashing ocean surf, or I would fly over high mountains where there was wind blowing. There was a lot of negative ions, and it allowed me to absorb the energy. Or going through storm clouds allowed me to absorb that energy, and it was able to keep me going for long periods of time without a normal level of sleep. I think I remember one time it was 4 or 5 nights without any kind of real sleep, and I was still able to go to work. Do I recommend that? No, because natural sleep is by far the best for your physical body. I'm just saying that in extreme circumstances, when I didn't seem to have another choice, it was possible when I astral projected to do that. But you don't need to astral project in order to direct your life force energy. Samir Youssef had a question about the lifespan of the astral body. I want to address that because sometimes there's some confusion about that. And there is, I think, in the wider community most especially. The physical body, we're all aware of that. You live about 100 years tops, more or less. You feed your physical body with food and other things, and it keeps you running for about that 100 years. Eventually, you're running out of life force energy in one form or another. It's breaking down, and you end up passing away. But while that physical body is functioning, there is a silver cord, the astral cord. That's really, I think, a bundle of fibers from what I've seen. And it connects to the astral body. It feeds the astral body energy. Once the physical body dies, that energy transfer is severed. So the clock begins to tick. Every astral body has X amount of life force energy with which it can use to survive on the astral plane. It can, if it has earned the right and has gained the experience, it can move on to the next plane of existence. Or it can choose to reincarnate once more onto the physical plane. But there's a limit to how long you can spend on the astral plane because that energy is gradually dissipating. We've spoken how vampirism, parasitism was used by the master, Gulam. He was talented enough to go to the fifth dimension, but instead he chose to stay and experience that worship and grab that energy, siphon it from others. And in that way, he was able to sustain himself much longer on the astral plane than he should have been. But that is something which luckily is fairly rare. So you've got to make that decision. And it's also why many people, when they see spirits, if these spirits are quote unquote much older than 100 years after they died, you'll notice that they're very indistinct. Their individual features have become blurred. They don't have anything below the waist. It's because the body, the astral body, is dissipating. It's disintegrating. And that's assuming that the soul is still associated with it. There are many cases when all you're seeing is leftover shells, essentially astral corpses, which appear animated, but the soul has gone elsewhere. And that explains many times why people report seeing some of these old spirits going through repetitive actions over and over again, and they don't notice them. They don't notice anything because they can't. They're essentially walking corpses because the intelligence is gone. At any rate, that's how things work as far as lifespans on the astral. Now, if I travel into the future, that's different because keep in mind that yes, I might be in my astral body 13,000 years in the future, but I'm still connected to my astral cord. It's still feeding me energy through time and space. Next up was Haunted by a Succubus. I told you during my Halloween episode the experience I had as a seventh grader, which is grade 8 in the UK, that I had with this female demonic force called a succubus. And the question was, would the succubus have been frightened or irritated or what have you by not just the Bible, but also maybe the Torah or the Quran? The short answer is I can't be sure because I've never tested it. And I don't like saying yes to something unless I'm sure about it. I suspect that it would work, but I don't know for sure. Typically, I think there's power associated with words and names, and in some cases books. But I can't say for sure. Hopefully, you'll never have a chance to try it out. But if you do, let us know. I'm curious. Lonely Waves and Kristen Freeman indicated that they've had experience with these creatures, these succubi, and now they know how to handle them. I want to mention as well that there's also a male version of this called the Incubus, which presents as a male, but has pretty much the same modus operandi. Next up is Salvia Tripp. Are there government jobs where you have to patrol the Astral? I answered this question a long time ago, but it's a fun one. The answer is, I know at least in one case, yes. I went to visit the White House when the first day that George W. Bush became president, and I knew he was in the Oval Office, and I tried to project there. And before I could get into the office, I was stopped cold by two Astral Secret Service agents who inquired who I was and why I was there. And in that short, brief time, I was able to scan their minds such that I realized that their bodies were being kept in some chamber nearby underground where they were being kept under with some sort of drug that enabled them to project for a much longer time than is typically possible. How one would apply for such jobs, I have no idea. I was never interested in taking on that particular occupation. If you ever figure it out, you probably won't be allowed to tell me either, because I'll probably make you sign some super top secret non-disclosure. So who knows? Next up, you said that extreme emotions will get you pulled back to your body. And I apologize, I didn't write down who said that. Anyway, you said that extreme emotions will get you pulled back to your body. How did you and the succubus enjoy yourself on the Astral? I could feel that my physical body rather, was pulling me back fiercely when I was experiencing all these emotions, very strong emotions. But I was held in this claw-like vice that prevented me from returning to my physical body. And that was something that I'd never felt before. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't exactly fight it at that point. I just noted it. So there we are. That was Q&A, questions and answers, number 18. If you liked it, why don't you hit that like button, share it with those of like minds. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you have, hit that bell. That way you'll always be notified, because here in the U.S. on Eastern Time, 8:15 a.m. on a Saturday, we always have a new episode. So whatever time that is for you, you can figure it out and you can count on it. And as always, I'm Rick, and I will see you on the astral plane.